coming out tonight. I'm Jeff Greer, the Grosse Pointe Democratic Club. We're really glad you could make it. Tonight's event is a conversation about a very challenging topic. Infrastructure and storm and sewer management particularly affects a lot of us in this area. I'd like to see a quick show of hands from anybody here who lives on the east side who's suffered any kind of property loss or damage because of storm and sewer. Have you had water in your basement, a flooded car, backed up sewer lines? Yeah. You can see that this issue affects many of us, and a comprehensive solution lies outside any of our individual actions. We're hoping today we can work toward an understanding of how our local, state, and federal governments are working to solve the problem and how we all need to work together. Our goal for you tonight is to inspire you to care, to know more, and to take action. I'm here to introduce our moderator, Craig Fahle. Most of you already know Craig. He was born in Grosse Pointe Park. He graduated from Grosse Pointe South, and he's an expert in facilitating conversations that make our community stronger. Craig has won awards for his reporting in his daily public affairs program, The Craig Fahle Show, which was on WDET. Over the course of that show, he conducted more than 10,000 interviews. He was also public affairs director for the Detroit Land Bank, and he's currently public relations director at BVK PR and Creative. That acronym is a mouthful. He also hosts a podcast there. So please help me welcome Craig tonight.
Well, I certainly appreciate it, and I'll be honest with you, we had a couple of meetings before this, and I was really sort of struggling to sort of wrap my head around this because of the scope of this problem. And this is one of the problems I think people have when we talk about infrastructure and the need for infrastructure improvements, especially the infrastructure we don't necessarily see. It impacts all of us in a lot of different ways. We are all afraid of what it's going to cost to fix it, but the cost of not fixing things, as many of you clearly have experienced, is just as high. But what do we need to do to make sure that other people understand that just because it's not hitting them today, it might not hit them down the road? So I figured this conversation is tough. There's a lot of things to get to. We're going to talk a little bit about how we got here, what the systems are that we have right now, what are some temporary fixes we might be able to do to alleviate the problem, but what do those temporary fixes mean for other people and our neighbors, etc. And also, what's it going to take long term to really think about how to reimagine the system in a way that's going to work more effectively and keep us from having to basically throw away our belongings every couple of years when we get what is supposed to be a 25-year storm almost every year these days. Climate change has a role to play in this as well. How do we plan for that? So we need to get to that. And also what you need to do to make sure that you're asking the right questions of your elected officials and get them to act on some of these solutions, because it is not going away. But again, out of sight, out of mind is too often a problem when it comes to infrastructure. So we figured we'd have a pretty wide panel of people to sort of talk a little bit about this, various disciplines that we have. First off, I want to thank the Great Lakes Water Authority. Navid Meron is here to answer some questions if you have them a little bit later on in this process. But let me introduce the panel real quick, the people that will be talking about this in just a minute. First, we have let's go down the end here. We have Bill Schuster, who of course is a professor at Wayne State University, but not only a professor, he of course is the chair of his department of Civil and Environmental Engineering at Wayne State. Thank you for being here very much. Also, we then have, of course, Jay Jeurgenson, who is a longtime community activist in Jefferson-Chalmers. He is here as well, and has been somebody who is quite vocal about the need for solutions to this problem over the years. We also have with us Kevin Hertel, State Senator from District 12. We appreciate it, Democrat, of course. And Laura Verona, who is the District Supervisor in the Public Wastewater Unit of EGLE. We appreciate you being here as well. So there's a lot to get to. But what I want to do before we do that is sort of get a little bit of an update on what's happening with the legislature around some of these issues. And joining us today is, of course, Joe Tate, who is not just your state representative from the Fighting First. He is also, of course, the Speaker of the Michigan House. Joe Tate, come on up here and give us
Hi, good evening, Grosse Pointe Dems. Thank you for having me. And I know my counterpart, Senator Hertel is here, so I know he'll be definitely adding to the discussion in terms of what we've been able to do in Lansing. I think at the end of the day, what we've seen in the past 8 months have been significant since last year's election, when Democrats took control of both the House and Senate and re-elected our governor. So you've seen a lot of work around putting people first for the first 8 months. So everything from how are we valuing workers by repealing right to work, reinstating prevailing wage, how are we taking care of working families, by expanding the earned income tax credit, and phasing out and repealing the pension tax. Also, how are we creating safe and strong communities around gun violence reduction, and how are we ensuring that everyone is treated equally before the eyes of the government with expanding our Civil Rights Act that we do have. In terms of, in addition to that, which there's a lot of, and I know a lot of it won't be able to be discussed here tonight, but I know it will be touched on in terms of how we've been deploying resources as a state. We passed, in the summer, we passed an $82 billion budget. One of the most historic budgets. We look at not only the investments that are made in our schools, that are made in our local communities, but in particular our infrastructure. So everywhere from adding, being able to spend down the federal dollars that we still have around water infrastructure projects. You look at $80 million for a bridge bundling program and over $400 million for road repair. And I know there will be more details in terms of what's being deployed in the district, so everything from the Points into Jefferson-Chalmers. But we know that we still need more work. We know that this is only just a part of just the entire process. There's going to need to be work everywhere from the local level through the work that myself and Senator Hertel do in Lansing, but also from our congressional delegation and work that needs to be done in DC and the investments that are going to be made, which I know that there have been some recent exciting news just about some investments coming into the east side of Detroit and into the Grosse Pointe. In terms of what we're looking at for this fall, we want to keep the gas on the pedal. So you're going to see a lot of work around health and well-being, work around reproductive health, as well as codifying the ACA, Affordable Care Act. Also energy and environment. There's work going to be around grid reliability, affordability. We also have a climate package that's been introduced as well too, to ensure that we are being stewards of the environment in Lansing and making sure that we are meeting the goals that we need to meet there. And then finally, how are we growing our economy and how we're ensuring we're bringing everyone with us with investments or taking a look at how we continue to have targeted tax relief, especially for working families, and then as well how are we taking care of those, especially working families with child care and work that needs to be done there. So a lot of work that needs to be done there. And we will continue to keep you updated as we go along. This is an exciting panel. I know there's going to be quite a bit of discussion going on in terms of how we can continue to bring solutions to the table to ensure that we have the upgrades to the water infrastructure system that we need. So thank you so much for the time, and really appreciate it. Really excited to hear the panel.
With that, also, it's nice to see elected officials showing up and listening tonight. So Tim Killeen, of course, your county commissioner here as well, so we also appreciate him being here. So every level of government almost is represented. Any city officials here?
I'm not an official, but I represent Councilwoman Letitia Johnson's office.
Oh, okay, the city of Detroit, very good. Oh, that's right. Okay, nice to see you. Absolutely, you were a part of the last panel that we had here. It's been a while, so. Oh, great. like I said, this is important, so having people here and actually paying attention is a bonus for all of us tonight, so we appreciate that. As I mentioned at the beginning of this, I thought it was important to sort of give people a sense as to how we got here. What we're dealing with when it comes to especially our stormwater infrastructure systems that we have, how old they are, what technology we're utilizing. And I thought it might be best to start with Bill Schuster on this one, since he is, of course, a professor of civil and environmental engineering. He has a little knowledge of this. Am I correct in thinking that basically the system is unchanged from when it was built over 100 years ago at this point? And please use the microphone. You've got one in front of you.
So is the system unchanged from when it was built, largely at the turn of the century or in the 1920s? Most of the, for the past 25, 30 years, I've been doing work in many American cities, including Detroit, Cleveland, Camden, New Jersey, New Orleans. But most of our infrastructure around the United States has gone unchanged. There's lots of, I think, add-ons, and we try to increase capacity where we have problems, but there's been no comprehensive redo of our wastewater collection and conveyance system and how we deal with stormwater over probably the last 100 years. That complete redo, that complete remaking. We have lots of regulations now that have helped us make changes, but again, we still end up with overflows, sewer overflows, either at the residential level, going to the neighborhood level, going to the regional level, as we saw in 2021. So I think that's when we don't have a system that's built for our current climate circumstance. Might be a way of summarizing that, so I'll stop there.
And also though, there are certain choke points within the system. So as the region grows, have we figured out a way to sort of lessen the burden on the endpoints of the system like we have here in our area? Or is it something that, we just didn't factor in as we grew out?
We're trying to retain capacity. I think using the term of drying out the system applies here. And there's been great efforts by DWSD, GLEWA, many other folks in consultation with engineering consultancies, EGLE, US EPA, to how do we best do this? But doing it comprehensively in an equitable way. You still have people at the, who are getting inundated. We have eviction by flooding in our east side communities. So how do we build an equity in these systems? There's only a certain amount of capacity in these systems, but we can add capacity. We can create capacity with different technologies and different natural infrastructures. But how we do this, I think it's important that we're all here tonight because we each have a role in that. We've either, I think one thing I wanted to bring up is that we all live with water on the east side. The water giveth and the water taketh away. and so what this means to me is that there's different water cultures. The way that we live with water is different in Jefferson-Chalmers than, say, in Riverbend or in Grosse Pointe Park or in Island View. These are all very distinct because there are different parts of the system that work okay or don't work or are in need of repair, or perhaps they do work in other ways. There's also inequity in how we're able to respond to the insult of, say, flooding or a septic backup in our basement. I think it's an imperative that there be protection. If you're vulnerable, you should have protection against these types of insults, environmental insults, in very intimate places like your home. So I'll leave it there.
No, I appreciate that very much. Yeah, no, absolutely. Pick up that microphone. I was going to talk to you a little bit about that, Laura, and get your input on this because we're thinking a lot about this from our own personal perspective. When we see water in our basement, we obviously know that there's an issue with the system, but it creates all kinds of environmental issues that we don't necessarily think about when we have the system that is routinely overflowing and not able to handle the capacity, correct?
Well, yeah, okay, so I kind of want to talk about a few things.
Please do.
So, I know
I forgot the opening statements, by the way, my apologies. It's not quite a television broadcast here, I apologize. Go ahead.
So I know that Bill was talking about some of the historical perspective of infrastructure in the region, and I'm
Right, close.
I'm just trying to add on some facts or give some information. I do agree that, with climate change, we are seeing wildly different events than we have in the past, and dealing with them is going to be a challenge moving forward. But infrastructure, I know, has that improved. So I just want to give some perspective that, yeah, there has been add-ons to the wastewater treatment plant. Specifically, I'm talking about the Great Lakes Water Authority wastewater treatment plant that services 3 million plus people in Southeast Michigan. And while maybe the demographic has changed and populations have shifted, the overall number of people being served by that wastewater treatment plant has been fairly steady and has increased capacity for secondary treatment, and that may or may not mean much to you, but other additions have been built into the system for dealing with wet weather flows. So like maybe in 2000, there was, this sounds terrible, like 20 billion gallons of untreated, uncontrolled combined sewer overflow being discharged into waters of the state. Whereas now we're down to like 2 billion gallons, which 2 billion gallons is still a lot. We still have room for improvement, but we're getting there. And through the Clean Water Act, we issue what are called NPDES permits, National Pollution Discharge Elimination System permits. It's for any discharge to waters of the state is required to have a discharge permit. And in these permits, the communities remaining that have untreated, uncontrolled combined sewer overflow points have schedules in their permits for correction of those outfalls. So we recognize that it's a problem, still needs to be addressed. We're working through trying to solve those issues with those communities. And really and I'm only talking from the perspective of Southeast Michigan because that's really all I know. But those communities are primarily around Wayne County. So that's just a little bit of perspective on maybe where we are today with the problem of treating wet weather and combined sewer overflows. And then to your point about, yeah, the wet weather events do have an environmental impact. I mean, I think everybody will agree with that. There's the public health threat, there's the environmental threat, any pollutant that is discharged into waters of the state, right, is, potentially injurious. And there are some things that we can control with point sources that we are working through as a department with initiatives to, do our best to manage those point sources because we can control those. But there's this other issue of non-point sources that we can't control. And there's a large impact to water quality and, potentially public health with the non-point sources. So through my program, Public Wastewater, we are, like I said, working with communities to eliminate as best we can the point sources. But yeah, once we tackle that, I think that we still can't ignore the non-point sources.
And explain to people the difference between a point source and a non-point source real quick, because some of this is like...
Yeah, that's an unfault. Oh, so like a point source is from a pipe. So it's a defined discharge. So like from a wastewater treatment plant, from a pipe that you can clearly identify where it came from. That's a point source. A non-point source is basically runoff that could come from anywhere. So like runoff over agricultural fields or just runoff over land that makes it to waters in the state.
So it would be non-point source then if, say, the sewers are overflowing in your city, and then the water flows somewhere other than the sewer? Or would that technically be considered part of that overflow? Because, I mean, it's something a lot of people experience, water up to their front porch, et cetera. It goes somewhere, it doesn't necessarily go down the drain.
Right, so again, if it comes from a primary source, if it comes through a pipe, then that's a point source. If it's just spilled over land and makes it to waters of the state, then it's a non-point source.
Okay, got it, very good. Jay?
Yeah, I'm gonna, in my work in the community, we do a lot of education. I'm gonna ask Heather and John to come up front real quick. I'm gonna come around the front here. Heather, you can sit. John's gonna do the work. Just pull your chair up. You've had a rough day,
Oh, I
so.
have. I cooked, I cleaned
We're
up
gonna
after
explain.
him.
I'm gonna grab my mic and, well, I need to be close to the board chair. So there's 3 handouts. There's 3 handouts. There's this one. There is the About handout. And there is the wastewater collection system handout. All right. So, John and Heather have recently renovated their kitchen. Heather wanted a Whirlpool. She wanted something that was built in Ohio. John wanted about the Samsung. And last weekend, the Samsung broke down. So they've been having to do dishes. And so Heather worked from home today and waited 3 hours for a technician to show up to find out that the little part they needed was back ordered due to supply chain problems. So, Peter, unfortunately Peter's a little lazy. He was supposed to do, yes, he's his favorite, but he was supposed to do dishes tonight. So John did dishes. This is John. And this is Heather having a glass of wine in a bubble bath because she's had a rough day. And so when John drains the sink, and after Heather is done and she drains the tub, and Peter, who's on his Instagram account, comes in and takes a piss, this all ends up in one pipe, right? And we know what rolls downhill, right? You can fill in the blank, what rolls downhill, right? So gravity takes this to a single pipe, often in the street, depending upon where you live, it might be in the alley. And when it rains, the storm water from the storm, this is sewer or sanitary, ends up in the same pipe. And when the system is overloaded because of the intense storms that we've had, we have problems with the system. The system reaches the capacity. All right, thank you. You guys are done. So, in our community, we have concern because we live at the receiving waters of 2 significant and huge watersheds. For those of you that traverse Jefferson Avenue, you'll know where Connor Avenue is. If you keep your boat at Bayview Yacht Club, or if you've been there, you know where that is. Connor Avenue, the Connor Creek watershed. Everybody know what a knoll is versus a swale? Right? A knoll is high ground. A swale is low ground. Bathtub. Think about it being a bathtub, right? So watersheds are knolls and swales. So the Connor Creek watershed is a swale that goes all the way up into Macomb County and continues up, we believe, along Grosse Pointe. Somewhere between Mount Elliott and Connor is a knoll that defines the Connor Creek watershed. Fox Creek used to be part of the Milk River. Everybody know where the Milk River is? Right? Okay. So the Milk River and Fox Creek were one time part of the same tributary. Fox Creek's headwaters are currently at the corner of Ashland and Jefferson, and it is daylighted from Jefferson to the Detroit River. Okay? So, north of Jefferson, Fox Creek makes a hard right and goes north and east and connects with the Milk River. Somewhere around Fisher Road, who lives north of Fisher? There's a few folks. Somewhere north of Fisher, the Black Marsh Basin flows, also referred to as conveys, those combined flows to the Grosse Pointe Woods discharge, which is on River Road. That is the Milk River. If you live east or south of Fisher Road, in heavy rains, if you flush your toilet, it ends up in Fox Creek and in my backyard. That is a combined sewage overflow. You with me? All right, go.
What's the difference between daylight and a piped?
Yeah, so I'm gonna get that. So we are literally in Jefferson-Chalmers surrounded by water. The Detroit River is our southern boundary. Fox Creek and Connor Creek are exposed bodies of water, like on River Road, that is daylighted. You can see the water. When it is in a pipe, it still is a body of water. So the Detroit River Interceptor, the DRI, runs on Jefferson Avenue and conveys flows from the east down to the treatment plant that Laura was referring to in southwest Detroit. And we know what runs downhill, right? Nobody pumps sewage or sanitary. It runs with gravity. But when it gets really deep in the ground, it has to be lifted up and dumped back into the pipe that's going to convey it to the treatment plant. So, Blue Hill Pumping Station, which is at the corner of Mack and Cachu, if you're familiar with that 3-story brick building behind the PNC, that's the Blue Hill Pumping Station, conveys sanitary flows to the Frood Pumping Station, which is along Clarepoint. It's the big brick building before you get to Bayview Yacht Club. Okay? Connor Creek, and Frood is a lift station. Frood lifts sanitary from the depth of the ground that it's in and puts it back into the DRI so it can be sent west. Right? All the, fill in the blank, that's coming from Macomb County and down Connor Avenue, 24-foot diameter pipes. The DRI is 14 feet in diameter at Jefferson and Alter. That's some big pipes, okay? So, Connor Avenue, we got sewage coming down there. There at the big round station at Connor, the big historic one. There's 2 stations there. They are also lift stations. So as the sewage is coming down Connor Avenue and it gets deep in the ground, the Connors Creek pumping stations are lift stations and they lift it up also into the DRI. But when that station is full, it does a what? A CSO. The Connor Creek CSO, just north of Bayview Yacht Club, is the largest CSO in the state. On June 25th, 2021, Blue Hill, the Frood Pumping Station, and the Connor Creek Station all failed. That's why we were hit so hard on the east side. So that system was filled up and it had nowhere to go, and we had sewage spewing out of the Fox Creek CSO that had flooded our streets, and we had condoms hanging from trees. Okay? So that's how the system works.
Go right ahead, please.
All right, I'm only trying to give some factual or some information, right? So Connor Creek is a retention treatment basin. So it's designed to take up to 13,000 cubic feet per second of storm flow, right, and treat it through that basin. The treatment consists of screening, skimming, settling, and disinfection. It's designed to meet water quality standards at times of discharge. So there's a huge importance here to understand that there's a combined sewer overflow basin, which is treated to meet water quality standards, and then there's untreated, uncontrolled combined sewer overflow, which is not treated. So kind of what Jay was talking about, yeah, Connor Creek is the largest CSO basin, and it treats a lot of sewage, combined sewage, right? But as discharge, meets water quality standards. And so there's a huge significance between untreated, uncontrolled, and treated out of an RTB. There was CSO, right, in the region. I just want to put into perspective too that event dropped 8 inches of rain in 5 hours, right? That's tremendous. So this is a combined area, right? Just for perspective, if there was a separated sewer system, we have a standard, our statewide policy is that you would have to transport, store, or treat all flows generated up to a 25-year, 24-hour storm event, which is about 3.9 inches of rain in 24 hours, right? That's the minimum standard. In this event, so that's what we would require for a separated system, right? Just for perspective, granted this is a combined system, but it dropped 8 inches in 5 hours. So you take that rainfall intensity, right, and you shorten it by 1/3 and you double it. So the infrastructure was not designed to handle an event like that. And I know this is going to be very unpopular, but with an event like that, there was going to be sewage in people's basements, just because the pipes can't handle that. That's the unfortunate reality.
I guess that sort of leads to the question though, is does the system that we have in place, and the amount, I realize that, this is an unusual event, but they are becoming more frequent. Does the system we have in place right now, and the standards we have in place, are they going to be effective in meeting the needs, or is this something that's going to continue to happen? I mean, we talk about new retention basins, we talk about building, new places to treat this, but, are events like we saw that year something that we should be planning for now? Or is it just such an outlier that you don't think necessarily that we're gonna have to just plan for this to be a semi-regular occurrence?
I'm not sure I have a good answer for that, because it's all dependent on the rain event. And I can't predict that.
Well, let's hear from Senator Hertel real quick.
I mean, I would say, granted, that was a very historic storm, but just not long ago, we saw 2 rain events in 2 days that weren't that far off from some of those events. In fact, in northern Macomb County, there was a state of emergency that was declared in Chesterfield and Baltimore because of the amount of rain that was seen in those communities and the flooding that occurred. At the Chapelton Retention Basin at the foot of 9 Mile Road, something that it was in my former House district, so I've worked a lot on infrastructure in that region. When I had St. Clair Shores and East Point in the State House, there has only been a couple times since the current Public Works Commissioner has had to open those gates and have an overflow from that facility. They've had treated overflows. This was an untreated overflow, and in those 2 days, they opened it up both times because those rain events produce so much rain in a short period of time. So this is something that we're seeing over and over again, and you might have gaps between them. Sometimes they show up in 2 days, like we saw last time, or you might see it once or twice a year. And every study that I've seen has said that the Great Lakes region is going to see an increase in these type of rain events in the foreseeable future. It's due to climate change, and something that, while we're working at the state level to pass a climate package right now, that will do our part at the state level to try to address the needs, to reduce our carbon emissions and try to reduce climate change, at least slow it down. That's a worldwide question that has to be addressed. We can only do so much. I think we should be a good actor here as a state and do everything that we can, but our other states in the country are going to have to do the same thing, as well as other nations around the world, in order to see a real impact. So I would assume that over the next, at least in the near future, we're going to continue to see these types of rain events, which means that we have to update our infrastructure in a way that can handle them. And that, look, what happened a few years ago here in the points and the flooding that we saw in Jefferson-Chalmers and the failure of concrete that caused an immense amount of flooding, right? It was horrible. The other side of that is, if the system was working properly and you were just to allow the overflow to occur, you're also putting an immense amount of pollution into the waterway, right? And so with the outdated infrastructure that we have, there is no good outcome from these situations. You're either polluting the waterway, which I would say is unfortunately better than putting a lot of sewage into people's basements, which is a biohazard and a huge cost to residents. So you have 2 choices, they're both bad. What we need to do is invest in the infrastructure in a way that allows for more retention, so that you can retain more water for longer periods of time before you have to treat and release back into the water source. Allow for more softscapes across our communities, so that we have a ton of concrete everywhere, which is causing a ton of runoff into our sewer system. When you have a combined system, that is a huge pressure on it. So we need to provide more softscapes, but then we also need to increase the sizes of the capacity of our plants and the size of the pipes that are in the ground to be able to hold more. So we're working in Macomb County, and I'll leave it at this, but to use the current in-system storage and find every bit of that pipe that we can use with gates and things like that, to retain as much as we can before you have to let out an overflow, whether it's partially treated or untreated. Both of those aren't good. And so we have to use the capacity that we have currently, but we have to build new capacity, and that's where things get very, very expensive, to the tune of hundreds of millions of dollars. For the region, we're in the billions probably. But we've got to start doing it now, or we're going to continue to be having this conversation when my son, who's 6 years old today, is my age. And this has been going on my whole life.
Go ahead, Jay. then
Yeah,
I'll-
so I think that, Laura and I have been on this discussion for a while, and we can agree to disagree about the challenges in the system, but I think that I would encourage you to take a look at, just a little over a year ago, I believe we issued their report. The executive summary is on our website. Read what happened and judge for yourself about responsibility for managing the system. I think there's little question that climate is going to continue to cause these problems. As recently as April 30th, I was in the Home Depot in Harper Woods, and there were 3 residents from the Gratiot 7 Mile area who were debating which sump pump they should purchase because they had sewage in their basement. It does not take heavy rains for our infrastructure to fail. My colleague and neighbor here, John Myers, he's been on television and he'll tell you 2014, 2016, 2019, and 2021, he had a swimming pool in his basement in Jefferson-Chalmers. That's 4 times in 9 years. That's every other year. We're up for one this year. Hang on to your britches, folks. I mean, the reality is that our system cannot handle the intensity of storms. Doesn't matter how intense the storm. We know climate change is real. The intensity of our storms will continue to challenge our system. And increasing capacity is one solution, as is reducing demand. I was visiting my brother in Chicago at the beginning of August, and as I left the town, I'm a big public radio fan. As I was leaving the city, WBEZ, this public radio station here, was announcing that the Chicago district was encouraging people to not use their water appliances because of the storm that was coming. If everybody here did not flush their toilet, do their dishes, take a bath, take a shower, when it's raining heavy, the only thing it's gonna cost you was a little more air freshener. Because the reality is that if we reduce demand on the system, there's less likelihood that your feces are going to end up in my backyard. That's the reality.
You bring up the thing about things ending up in your backyard. Bill, I wanted to get your take on this. When you look at the systems that are in place right now, what the capacity is, are there short-term things that can be done? Are there simple fixes that would alleviate the problem temporarily while we figure out a bigger fix to the system?
Well, in our work across the east side, we're very active in looking at the different modes of flooding. And in this presentation, your information packet, go through, flooding is a very general term. And I think it's important to define, the very different ways we can be flooded. But in terms of capacity, I think we're often looking at a system that we expect to be fail-safe. But can we start to change the paradigm to looking at safe to fail? Can we reduce vulnerability, for example, in our homes? DWSD has a pilot program to basically install different devices to prevent sewer backups into the house. Only a few people have qualified for this program, but in my opinion, not associated with Wayne State University, but as a citizen and a resident, this is something that we owe, I think, every homeowner across the demographic spectrum, is to reduce that vulnerability so at least we're safe within our houses, in our neighborhoods. And then we start building out, once we're protected, we start building out the system in such a way to deal with these capacity issues. Decentralizing, when you think about how much flow comes down from Oakland County, Macomb County, and comes through the Lower East Side, it makes us a very high wastewater traffic area. And so can we decentralize? Can we motivate Oakland and Macomb to build their own wastewater treatment plants? There are ways of doing this, and it could be actually more efficient on the whole.
We'll get to that. We'll get to that question a little bit because I think that is, building that political consensus around something like this is something that we do need to discuss in a little bit. I just want to sort of get back to a couple of things. Some questions that came in from the audience here. The first question, and I thought this was interesting. If the Connor Creek and Freud pumping stations had been fully operational, and of course we call it Fruit on the east side, so that's okay. Had they been fully operational from that storm, would the 2021 flood issue have been as severe, or was it enough rain that we still would have had it?
Well,
I think that might be a good question.
yeah, so state law requires that 3 sources of power be provided to primary infrastructure. When the Detroit Edison took over the Detroit Public Lighting Department, they took down Mustersky, the steam plant in downtown Detroit. The Connor Creek CSO pumping station the CSO station had DTE primary power, it had a power generator backup, but Mustersky, it didn't have a third source. So when the DTE power went down because of the storm and the generator didn't come up, the workers for GLEWA were unable to get on campus because the electric gate was broken. It wouldn't work. In the Fruit pumping station, there are 5 pumps. 3 of them were offline because they were having electrical upgrades, and there was no backup strategy to deal with those 3 pumps. So you know what happens when you plug in too many fixtures to a plug? Blows the circuit. So when all 5 of those pumps went calling for power, and only 2 of them had power, all the other 2 timed out. So they didn't work. So there were failures in the system. It's a simple reality. Would we have had flooding in our basement? Yes. Have we had flooding in our basement in the past? Yes. So, I had a $25,000 loss across my 6 properties. I was up to my butt in sewage. And that was one storm. I can tell you that my properties experience sewage in their basement on a regular basis. I have a neighbor who relieves himself in a bucket during heavy rains because he knows that if he opens his backflow preventer or if he flushes his toilet, there's just as good a chance that the sewage that's leaving his house is going to end up back in his basement. Those are systemic problems. And I'm not trying to blame anybody, I'm just saying that we need to step back and take a look and say, what are some of the potential solutions? You mind if I run some data down on this real quick? Okay, cool. So there were 49,941 FEMA claims in the national disaster. There were 23,167 of those that were paid to the tune of 46%, $78 million, and the average is $3,300 a piece. In the 5 gross points in Harper Woods, there were 8,840 claims. Only 18% of those were paid, total of $1,583, $6.2 million, roughly $3,900 a piece. Now those are unaudited FEMA data. According to the Detroit Water Department, they had 29,636 claims, which, you can make a claim against the water authority. Unfortunately, both GLEWA and the Water Department denied everybody's claims to the tune of $181 million, which is $6,000 per person. There were 24,000 claims by GLEWA, none of which were paid. If we use the roughly $3,000 to $6,000 per claim, we end up with somewhere between $72 and $144 million. If we add that to the $181 million and the $1.5 million and the $78 million, we're talking about a lot of resources.
All right. Well, hold on one second. We do have a response from the Great Lakes Water Authority in regards to the claims issue, I believe, but go ahead, please.
So the response, so Naveed Moran, Chief Operating Officer for Wastewater Operations, I am responsible for the GLW wastewater system. So to answer the question, because I wanted to get specific to that, one of the questions was, if the station would have worked, would there have been no backups? GLW initiated 2 events. Preceding the wet weather event, we initiate an internal investigation to determine which the way we do this is through modeling. You model the system to be able to make a determination if the system would have operated as designed, if it would have been able to prevent flooding. The study that GLWA led was no, there would have been no difference. In addition to the internal investigation we did, GLWA Board of Directors initiated its own panel with excluding every member of GLWA executive team or team members other than interviews. That investigation was about approximately $1 million that was done by AECOM, which is one of the largest consulting firms in the country. And their results, under the umbrella of the general counsel and attorney, identified that there would have been no difference in the flooding because of the volume of water. The comment to the electrical effort that happened at the pump stations, just to be a little bit more clear on that. So the Fruit pump station is fed off of 3 power sources. But the power sources were from PLD, Public Lighting Department. DTE was in the process of purchasing those assets, or they are in the process of maintaining those assets. What happened was during the day before that event, a contractor hit that line. So therefore, there was damage to that line, and therefore we lost utility power to that station. So the station was only able to operate 2 pumps because the utility power source was out of service for that facility. The other facility, that Connor Creek pump station, the power outage there was house power. House power is the building lights went out. And that happened because there was a water line burst that happened in that station. But that station quickly came back online, and additional pumps came online at the Connor Creek facility. Unfortunately, we only got to five pumps operating in totality, but the outcome is this. When we did the investigation, so we operated 5 pumps during that storm event. But the key fact is that the study that ran a model independent of anything within respect to the assets, just taking the size of the equipment we have and the volume of water and comparing the two, made a determination that that water level would have reached the same place it did in many basements or in the system. So, thank you.
So,
Well,
you have a societal problem. I mean, there's a lot of different aspects here. I think contributing factors to the situation, the electrical supply, the reliability therein, there's transfer of assets, was there communication, for redundancy in the system. We talk a lot about this in engineering circles, of redundancy and building capacity so that if we do get caught with a surprise, basically there's resilience in the system and you can bounce back from it. So I think it's well taken, but it kind of gets beyond whose fault, or like if there was fault, and it gets to, this is a societal problem, how we communicate, how we work together, how we don't work together, is everybody good with?
Bill, no, it's sort of the point I wanted to get to here, and then sort of saying, okay, what is the capacity of the current system? Would this have made any difference if the system we had was working properly at the time? It seems when we start talking about power failures, etc., that we're getting away from the real issue, is whether or not we have the capacity to deal with what is going to be going on. We start talking about whose fault it was, as opposed to whether or not we have built something that is sustainable going forward.
Correct.
And that seems to be a distraction from us having the real conversation that we need to have as to what needs to be done to mitigate these issues going forward. I spent a lot of time, and so it's always easy to blame, oh hey, the Detroit Water and Sewers Departments, they screwed up, or Great Lakes Water Authority screwed up, as opposed to whether or not we're going to have a system that can withstand what are likely to be continuing things like this. So I want to start talking about this because it seems like a lot of the solutions that we do talk about, and if you look at Grosse Pointe Park and their plan to create this new spillway, right, this new emergency gate, which seems to, okay, alleviate the problem of flooding perhaps in some of their neighborhood basements, but it seems to push the problem down the river a little bit to other neighborhoods. And so we've got a lot of Band-Aids, or duct tape maybe is a better word here, or flex tape solutions to this, as opposed to starting to think about what we actually need to do investment-wise. So when you see a city like Grosse Pointe Park come up with a plan for, all right, we're going to create this gate so we can at least alleviate the pressure in our town, but what happens after our town doesn't really matter. I mean, it seems that is and I don't want to necessarily disparage anybody from Grosse Pointe Park here, this is my hometown after all, but it seems to be somewhat short-sighted. It solves their problem, but doesn't do anything to deal with the larger problem.
Craig, that's not uncommon. I mean, the folks in Grosse Pointe Farms aren't gonna pay for a solution in Grosse Pointe Park, right? Our municipal boundaries and the way in which we finance things relate specifically to the municipal jurisdiction within which you live. And 9 times out of 10, we're not worried about what happens in our downstream neighbors. Part of the problem with our water infrastructure, unlike other elements of our infrastructure, like streets that have potholes in them we can complain about, or power lines that fail with transformers or poles that snap, or a rec center whose pool isn't working, or whatever, we get to see that. Our water infrastructure is underground. We don't know about it till it bubbles up to our basement, right? And so part of the problem is making a direct connection between understanding how our system works, thank you, John and Heather, and figuring out the connection between how we spend our money and what it gets spent on. You know, I would argue that probably 90% of the folks in Grosse Pointe Farms who approved the $45 million bond issue have no idea what it's being spent on until the contractor shows up to dig up your driveway. I'll guarantee it. And yet, you know, do the math. There's 10,000 residents in Grosse Pointe Farms. $45 million is, $450, so you can do the math, I ain't a math teacher, but over 30 years, it's $150 per person per year.
I want to get Senator Hertel involved in this conversation for a second, because this is a man who represents just about every community that is negatively impacted by these overflows. I mean, this is your district. You have the entire shore of Lake St. Clair, basically, into the Detroit River. You get to hear it from everybody. You're at the end point of the system. How difficult is it to get people to listen to the concerns of residents here when they don't necessarily see it in their own backyard?
Yeah, so this is an issue I've been working on for a very long time because the need for a regional solution, right? And where I sit, I live in St. Clair Shores, not far from here. I grew up on the east side here in East English Village and in Grosse Pointe Woods. The pollution that's coming down the Clinton River from Oakland County is all along the shoreline to where I live. In fact, I worked at what is now Lake St. Clair Metro Park, but I know it as Metro Beach. How many times has the beach at Metro Beach been closed for decades and decades on end? A lot of that's because of the combined sewer overflows that are coming out of the Red Run Drain down the Clinton River, hugging our shoreline until they hit the Detroit River and fly down into Lake Erie. And guess what you see in Lake Erie? Incredible algae blooms that have shut down water intakes in recent years that have just created incredible amounts of pollution. Right? So this is all connected. There is no doubt that you have to have a regional solution. And I'm not here to say that's easy. That's very difficult, right? Because of the issues that Jay just mentioned. When you talk about the need to solve a problem, unfortunately, we always go to the easiest solution first, sometimes the least expensive solution first, and we don't put the resources where they need to go, which is actually attacking the long-term issues that have been plaguing our communities for so long. And so, it's not a secret with my colleagues.